Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulses. I have music, movies, art and culture, and this is Billboard Breakdown. So we're finally getting out of a lurching, generally incoherent summer and into the autumn. In other words, known as one of the most clustered and panicked times of the year when it comes to the Hot 100. The last hits of the year tend to debut in these weeks, and the gamble that they'll manage to snag some spots in the year-end list, the album release schedule starts to pile up, and things get all the more busy on my end. And that's not counting any major shifts on the charts like we got this week, or the dropping of surprise albums that come right the hell out of nowhere, which we'll be talking about more tomorrow, and you already know what I'm talking about here. But putting all that aside, we've got our top 10 and a new number 1 to talk about. Yep, as predicted, Can't Feel My Face by The Weeknd has taken that spot, swiping away on sales and streaming, and even despite some losses in airplay, it still has the top spot. And for the majority of that, you can point to the opening success of the new album from The Weeknd, Beauty Behind the Madness. Although I'd argue that Can't Feel My Face wasn't the bigger gainer off of that album. Now, what it did do was force back Cheerleader by Oh My down to number 2. Although the losses were coming pretty much anyway, thanks to softening sales and weakening airplay and streaming, even despite a slight boost on YouTube. Thankfully, it held back Watch Me by Silento from getting any bigger, even despite a decent sales week and its rock-solid YouTube presence keeping it at number 3. Although, losses in streaming might start heralding the song's exit, I gotta hope for something. But now we come to the real winner from the Beauty Behind the Madness' success, The Hills by The Weeknd at number 4. A song that I suspect over the next month or two might take its momentum even higher, especially as we get closer to the fall and Halloween. Let's face it, it's the closest horror-themed pop R&B song that we've had in years, and it's got that momentum now with strong sales, major gains on airplay, and even boosts in streaming and YouTube. I just wish I liked the song more than I do, but we'll see if it grows on me. Time might tell. Beneath it, we got Lean On by Major Lazer, DJ Snake, and Mia pushed back to number 5 as it continues to rule YouTube and gain in streaming and airplay, although the latter numbers did soften a bit, especially when looking at weaker than expected sales. It might be facing a vulnerable challenge from Good For You by Selena Gomez featuring A$AP Rocky, which is at number 6, with decent sales and airplay gains, but it also faded a little bit there and slipped on streaming this week. Its position might be just as precarious when you consider Fetty Wap 679 swelling up to number 7 off some gathering strength in airplay, sales, and streaming, even despite The Hills managing to leapfrog it. Now this takes us to our newest top 10 edition, Locked Away by Rock City featuring Adam Levine. A song I predicted would be a smash the first week I covered it, and honestly I'm okay with it. The sort of straightforward pop song that proves that Adam Levine's gift for sincerity in his lower range needs to be exercised a lot more often. He's good at it. Try on a Maroon 5 song sometime. And it's got a ton of momentum too, with big sales, potent streaming, and major airplay swell. Could definitely be contender for the top 5 going forward. What won't be, and yet somehow is still holding on, is Trap Queen, still at number 9. It's here because of streaming, pretty much nothing else. And yet it managed to hold its spot over Fight Song by Rachel Platten falling to number 10, which has sales and declining airplay. That's it. If we're looking for a song on its way out, it's probably this one. And on that note, our losers and our dropouts. Quite a few this week in both categories, so the slice of songs exiting naturally after reasonable runs. You're talking Body by Tove Lo, Like a Wrecking Ball by Eric Church, and Wet Dreams by J.Cole, and a few premature exits, with it being a particularly bad week for Chris Brown, as Fun with Pitbull and How Many Times with DJ Khaled, Lil Wayne, and Big Sean both exit, along with Tonight Looks Good on You by Jason Aldean. As for our losses, it proved to be yet another rough week for country radio, as Kick the Dust Up by Luke Bryan falls to 50, good. Lovin' You Easy by the Zac Brown Band falls hard to 70, and Young and Crazy by Frankie Ballard tumbles unexpectedly to 71. Of course, they didn't fall as hard as High by the Beach by Lana Del Rey, which collapsed to 97, and will likely be gone off the charts in maybe a week or so. Beyond that, the other losses There Should Have Been Us by Tori Kelly underwhelming to 75, and 2 songs from the Straight Outta Compton falling pretty hard as well, with the title track dropping down to 60, and Boys in the Hood by Eazy-E dropping to 65. Frankly, what's astounding is that they stuck around this long. Most movie soundtrack songs don't tend to stick around on the charts that long unless you got, let's say, a Let It Go or something. The fact that they are sticking around, it's got some staying power behind it. But where this week got pretty busy was in our gains. First, we got those following up on positive momentum, namely Here by Alessia Cara jumping up to 62, Love Myself by Haley Steinfeld living up to 52, and most exasperatingly, Hit the Quan by I Heart Memphis going to 27. See, this is why we should have stifled Silento early. It's now perpetuating a trend. Now we got the songs revived because of music videos, which is like Where You At by Future and Drake surging back to 59, and Drag Me Down by One Direction, their first big hit without Zayn, boosted back up to 14. Then we get the two that are just steady gainers all the way, namely Stitches by Shawn Mendes going to 20, and X's and O's by Ellie King rising to 57. And then finally we got All Eyes on You by Meek Mill, Chris Brown, and Nicki Minaj, which got a surprising boost to 31, and for the life of me, I have no idea why. It did pick up a little bit of airplay, but it lost streaming. I guess it might have picked up a bit of a boost on YouTube. It's pretty big there, maybe just because the Drake beef has finally faded enough for the song to rise on its own dubious merits, I guess. But speaking of dubious merits, let's talk about our solitary returning entry, shall we?
One time for my LA sisters, one time for my LA hoes. Lame niggas can't tell the difference. One time for a nigga who knows. Don't save her, she don't wanna be saved. Don't save her, she don't wanna be saved. Don't save her, she don't wanna be saved. Don't save her, she don't wanna be saved.
You know, as one J. Cole song exits, another comes back. And it's a damn shame we swapped out one of his best for one of his worst. Yeah, J. Cole's still a good rapper, and that oily oscillation that fills up the choppy melody, it's not a bad there, but the content really sours me on the song, with J. Cole thrashing the current generation of reality show women, even as he gets down with the baddest bitch and many of those girls, only to treat them not particularly well. But wait, it's okay when J. Cole does it because he's got no role models growing up. Not like those women had any role models anyway, but besides that, because those girls don't want to be saved, as if the J. Cole's role in this relationship is to save them. As a whole, the song feels monumentally self-serving, with a fragment of introspection in the first verse implying that maybe he's changed for the worse. Spoiler alert, I think he has. But he gives himself an exit by saying he has no role models while not giving the girls the same courtesy, and it hits a really bad note with me, especially with asinine lines like Martin Luther King would have been on Dreamville, or him crooning She's Shallow. It's just unpleasant. And what's worse enough is that it's presented well enough that it can almost slip its very noxious message in undetected. Almost. So, hopefully onto something with a little bit better, starting with number 100, I'm to Blame by Kip Moore.
You get exactly what you say. I come from a long line of bloodline that ain't gonna change. So take your pistol pointing finger right off of the trigger. I know where to aim. Hell, I'm to blame.
Yeah, I know. It's the most marginally country song in Kip Moore's last album, and that's not saying much, and I honestly don't dislike this. The banjo anchoring the melody with that jagged groove and the hammer and crack of the snare drums, it's all exposed edges and fire, and yet it never really explodes as much as you might want it to. Well, it's because the song is less than 2.5 minutes long and desperately needed a solo or a roaring crescendo to really get into gear, and yet even with that, I'm not sure it really would have helped. Between the rough filter on Moore's vocals that just sounds compressed and unnecessary, and the fact that the lyrics don't really build up too much beyond rough-edged outlaw bragging and pretty formulaic stuff at that, there's just not enough to the song beyond bluster that really gets to me, and it's short and it only exacerbates the lack of serious impact. Overall, it is listenable, but there are far better cuts from Wild, ones that Kip Moore should choose for upcoming singles, or he might be in for real trouble ahead on the charts. Just saying. Number 99, Cecilia and the Satellite by Andrew McMahon in the Wilderness.
Don't be afraid, Cecilia, I'm the satellite, and you're the sky.
You know, it's a telling sign of an act's buzz, or maybe just the people that watch my show, either way, that when I hear about an indie pop act and then realize that they dropped a debut album a year ago and this is the first time hearing about their single. Then again, considering how oversaturated indie pop can feel these days, I'm not altogether surprised it's the first time I'm talking about Andrew McMahon in the Wilderness and the lead-off single from their self-titled album. Now, Andrew McMahon is a name, if you're familiar with emo, pop punk acts, something corporate, or his old project Jack's Mannequin, you could recognize the guy, but you'd be forgiven for ignoring those old projects entirely, because with the exception of some slightly above average songwriting, this is basic electronic tinged piano driven indie pop with a full backing chorus. And while it's not bad in a walk off the earth sort of vein, I can't help but feel it's a little bit too slick and breezy to really stick with me, especially with the unnecessary reverb piled on the vocals. Overall, yeah, it's a fine enough song, but maybe coming from a Canadian perspective where we got tons of songs in this vein, does not stand out, at least for me. Number 98, About You by Trey Songz.
Don't you? I bet you think this song is about you. Yeah, I bet you think this song is about you. Don't you? I bet you think this song is about you. Ooh.
So apparently Trey Songz has another record coming out sometime this year. But the odd thing is that with the exception of that DJ Mustard collaboration, Nah Nah, Trey Songz has been surprisingly successful with the reissue of his 2014 album called, yes, Trigga Reloaded. Slow Motion was a bit silly and overproduced to be sure, but in terms of R&B ballads, it was surprisingly sensual and well put together, to the point where you can kind of overlook the fact that it was co-written by Charlie Puth. Anyway, this is his follow-up single at the reissue, and honestly, I like this too. Yeah, it's biting from DJ Mustard's minimalist template with the plinking melody and the trap percussion, but the bass isn't so crushing to overwhelm Trey Songz, getting his smooth and surprisingly non-sexual game on with a girl who just loves his music. So yeah, it's pretty blatant fan service, especially as it's him making moves on the shy girl, even despite being in rooms full of women, but it's not being played aggressively, and with the exception of that titties line in the first verse and the odd interpolation of You're So Vain by Esther Dean that works way better than it should, I actually think this is a pretty sweet track. Good on you, Trey Songz. Number 96, Liquor by Chris Brown.
The air is getting thicker. I can't help but to stare at you. Oh yeah, girl, what did you do to me?
On the far, far other end of the quality scale, did you all know that Chris Brown's got an upcoming album called Royalty coming in the works? Did you want to know? Did you care? In any case, it might be a sign of how far Chris Brown's star has faded that the lead-off single debuted this low on the charts. Or maybe it's just because it's terrible. The blatantly auto-tuned and reverb-saturated vocals against sandy cymbals featuring a melody so unstable and mixed so low in the mix that it gives the song no flow. The obviously fake snaps to the lyrics that imply that someone slipped something in Chris Brown's drink and he's playing it as a sign of infatuation. You flip the genders there. Hell, even if you don't, something becomes extremely wrong with this picture. I'll admit the song does capture the unsteady feeling of having drunk way too much, but again, why would anyone want to listen to that or feel that while listening to this song? Especially when it's this sloppy instead of being suave or energetic. So if this is the next song coming from an upcoming Chris Brown album, this is what's telling what's coming ahead? Ugh, no hope for this. Number 94. Downtown by Macklemore and Ryan Lewis featuring Eric Nally, Melle, Kool Moe, and Grandmaster Cass.
You're the balance that will keep us safe. Have you ever felt the warm embrace of a leather seat between your legs?
So here's the thing. When I first heard this song, I immediately thought it was a complete, overblown mess, trying to recapture the magic of Macklemore's biggest singles from his last album, two of which I think are goddamn great, and they aren't even the best songs from the heist in my opinion. But I think I'm of the rare opinion that I like the Seattle MC a little bit more when he's not making goofy novelty tracks about mopeds or thrift shopping, and more when he's trying to flex his lyrical muscles or rapping about more serious topics. For as goofy as his sense of humor can be, he doesn't really have the elastic, expressive delivery in his voice to pull it off all that well, which is probably my first big issue with this song. Now, do I dig the old school funk of the track with the piano and the bass and the horn stings and the cowbell? For the fact that he's recruiting a slew of very solid golden age MCs who sound great on this sort of production like they never left it? Or the overblown bombast of the chorus, which really is catchier than it has any right to be? Yeah, I like a lot of this. It's a ton of fun. And Macklemore even manages to sneak in a couple offbeat lines that are pretty funny. But putting aside the corny lines and the general lack of intensity in Macklemore's rapping, I think my biggest issue with this track is a lack of potent flow. From the clunky instrumental change-ups to Macklemore's surprisingly basic lyrical construction. Golden Age throwback or not, he's still capable of a lot better than this. As a whole, while I might be kind of amused by this song, it's just in the same category as White Walls does for me, and being songs that aren't terrible, but far from Macklemore's best. He can definitely be doing better. Number 87, Levels by Nick Jonas.
There's levels to your love, yeah, there's levels to your love, and I know we can get higher. There's levels to your love, and I keep on climbing up. Rooftop.
So what is it with artists and re-releases this week? Because apparently since 2 singles off his self-titled album weren't enough, one being pretty great, one being pretty terrible, Nick Jonas has decided to add some tracks and re-release his self-titled album, with this being his lead-off single. And it's... honestly, I think I like Chains more, but this got a tightness to the groove that's kind of hard to deny. Especially with a snarled bass frolic, Nick Jonas has some raw charisma, and he's picking up more texture in his vocals, which is definitely a plus. And the lyrics, well, okay, they don't make a ton of sense. Half sex song and half rise to transcendence on shared euphoria. But then again, it's the same template that worked for Get Lucky by Daft Punk, and that worked for them. Honestly, I don't have a lot to say about the song beyond just liking it, so yeah, I'll go with that. Check this out. And finally, number 43, Smoke Break by Carrie Underwood.
Sometimes I need a stiff drink, sipping from a highball glass, let the world fade away. She said I don't smoke, but sometimes I need a long drag. Yeah, I know it might sound bad, but sometimes I need a smoke break.
You know, I think Carrie Underwood gets a lot more credit in country circles than she arguably deserves. Yes, she's got pipes. And yes, I've appreciated that she's managed to cram more writing credits onto her albums as time has passed. And yes, I'm not going to deny that she's got charisma and personality and even some good songs for the brand of pop country that she plays in. But going back through those albums and those big hits with a critical eye outside of the karaoke standards and the flaws, they become pretty glaring. Especially when you consider that Miranda Lambert could run circles around Carrie Underwood in terms of songwriting and a more nuanced vocal performance. So on that note, let's talk about the newest single from Carrie Underwood, the lead-off single from her upcoming album Storyteller called Smoke Break. And honestly, I think I kind of like this. Sure, it's over-mixed courtesy of Jay Joyce, but it does have some snarl and texture to it. And I like the sentiment of the people that she talks about just looking to take a goddamn break. Of course, in today's controversy-overloaded world, she was immediately accused of glorifying smoking, which is just stupid. Forget bro country's shameless glorification of meat-headed debauchery, which I suspect a lot of people aren't complaining about as much outside of the critical circle. When Carrie goes for populism for people who just need a goddamn break, she gets slammed for it? Ugh. Typical. On the flip side though, it's kind of hard for me to listen to this song and not think about Blowin' Smoke by Casey Musgraves, which is one of my favorite songs of 2013 and did the same sort of track and did it with tighter writing, delivery, and far more subtlety and texture. It was just a much better song. Overall, just left kind of ambivalent to Smoke Break. Far from bad, but not quite as good as I'd like it to be for the coming sign for a Carrie Underwood album. So overall, not a bad week, not a great week, but one that seems like several artists are lining up some big plans as the months go ahead. And as such, the best and worst are a little bit tricky here, so there weren't a lot of huge standouts. I mean, sure, Liquor by Chris Brown runs away with the worst of the week, but Dishonourable mention, yeah, you know, I'm gonna say, I'm giving it to J.Cole for No Role Models. Sure, it's got more personality and it could have done better, but it's that much more of a disappointment because of it. As for the best, you know what? I'm gonna give it to About You by Trey Songz this week for having some genuine sweetness. And honorable mention to Levels by Nick Jonas for just being surprisingly tight in the writing. Let's hope for a little bit more like this next week. But until then, I'm Mark. You're watching Billboard Breakdown on Spectrum Pulse. And I'll see you next time.